Welcome to the IMM Friday Flash Talk, anchored by Govin Whittles.
The reason why that responsibility was taken away from the Hawks is not yet known.
With marketing enthusiast Talia Grusin.
To have a return on sales, you need to have posts that are going to be engaging.
The IMM Institute's Friday Flash Talk. Welcome to another installment of the IMM Institute's Friday Flash Talk. On this platform, we hope to bring you the latest trends in the world of marketing, what marketing professionals are considering as they craft their campaigns, the latest strategies that are in use, and what's new in the world of marketing. We pride ourselves in bringing insights from leading marketing professionals, and today is no different. Joining us is Talia Grusin. She's a seasoned marketing professional, over 18 years experience in the media and fast-moving consumable goods sector. She's also someone who has a lot of experience dealing with consumer insights. And joining me as usual is my co-host, Talia Grusin. She's the MD of Gateway Synergy, our marketing guru who helps us navigate these conversations, lets us know what the industry professionals are trying and what they think. And today, we're discussing something very interesting, the power and pull of nostalgia marketing. I'm a nostalgic person. This is something that I should be able to contribute to very well, although I might be caught off guard by some of the latest trends. And I'm happy to say that Talia has prepared a comprehensive presentation around the power and pull of nostalgia marketing. And before we get into the conversation, Talia, we'll hand over to you and tell us what it's all about.
Okay. So hi, it's so nice to be with all of you. And yes, today I'm going to speak to you about nostalgia and the very evocative role that it plays within marketing, and just some amazing executions that I've been seeing in the market recently. Of how brands are really applying it to their strategies. So I'm going to start off with a quote that I really love from Dr. Seuss, because there's a deep child within me. And he says that sometimes you don't know the value of a moment until it becomes a memory. And that's nostalgia, right? Nostalgia acts as this wistful journey into our past that shapes very often our childhood memory. It's us remembering the happy times that evoke the sense of warmth and comfort within us, and remembering a more carefree time and carefree days, which are really shaped by innocence. And this brings about a profound sense of security for ourselves. Childhood generally acts as the sanctuary for us, and that's quite untarnished by how complicated life becomes as we enter into adulthood. And this nostalgia gives us the sense of strength and solace, especially when times are tough. And as adults, times get tough a lot, right? But nostalgia isn't just us reminiscing about this time in our lives. It's also us reminiscing for a version of ourselves that doesn't necessarily exist anymore, from a time when life was less complicated. And we live in this era of absolute constant distraction, and our attention is perpetually fragmented, and to a large extent by social media. And I'd imagine many of you can relate that we'll sometimes be sitting on the couch watching Netflix, possibly playing Block Blast, scrolling through Instagram, and then WhatsApp comes and interrupts us. And our minds are just constantly going and busy, and nostalgia transports us back. It's an escape into a simpler time when we were watching KTV with ad breaks, when we had time to read the whole Garfield cartoon in the Sunday Times. And it's for us transporting into a moment that we just view as life having been as more serene. Now, more than that, in a lot of the core research that I've been working on lately, what we're seeing is that even within this current fragmented sort of era, we do tend to see that younger people are more carefree than their older counterparts. And that's got to do with responsibility. During childhood and early adulthood, responsibility generally tends to be quite limited. And then as people mature and start taking on additional roles and responsibilities that are brought on by adulthood, and especially those that are linked to parenthood, there's this extra level of burden that starts weighing on them. Even if they enjoy the additional responsibility, life gets heavier. And nostalgia acts as a way of reigniting memories of more carefree times when paying the bills wasn't your responsibility, when what to cook for dinner was somebody else's problem and you got to run around the yard. And this is especially relevant within a South African context, when most childhoods were safer. And this is really, we're seeing this across the board, whether people grew up in Orange Farm, Umlazi, Benoni, a childhood had a greater sense of freedom than the current environment seems to allow. And it's something that people are quite wistful towards. So let's talk a bit about nostalgia in marketing. As we've said, nostalgia is the psychological occurrence that refers to these feelings of longing or wistfulness for the past, and it can be caused by a whole variety of things. It could be the smell of food your grandmother used to make. It could be a favorite song that you used to love. It could be family, friends, or photos that pull at your heartstrings. But ultimately what it does is it evokes these strong emotions within you that can be quite a generative force in shaping one's identity. And sometimes it's not even things that we miss. It's sometimes things like a rotary phone or a yo-yo that just trigger these memories of a time in our past. Now, nostalgia gives us this feeling of meaning and continuity in our lives. But ultimately, the role of marketing isn't just to build feelings of meaning and continuity, right? We're here to build brands, build brand equity, and to generate sales ultimately. But given this trend towards nostalgia marketing, there has been a lot of literature and a lot of research surrounding it as well at the moment. And trying to understand what the behavioral responses are to this triggering of emotion through nostalgia. And a couple of the studies that I stumbled upon recently are one is from the Grenoble School of Management, which looks at the introduction of warm feelings and happy memories. And when those are introduced to respondents, the respondents became more inclined to purchase a product. There was another study that was in the Journal of Business Research that found that the inclusion of nostalgic cues in advertising led audiences to have a much higher attachment to products and services, and this led to a higher likelihood of purchase downstream. So let's start off by looking at the role of nostalgia in communication. Nostalgia marketing can take on many different forms. And I know often personally when I think about nostalgia, I think of older legacy brands or heritage brands. And the role of nostalgia there can be very effective, but it also has many other shapes as well. But let's start off by talking about these heritage brands and how they've played really well in the space of nostalgia. I think for me, the first thing that's worth noting, though, is that going and slapping on a claim that says we've been around for 100 years isn't going to do enough to evoke any real emotion in audiences. What you want to be doing is reminding consumers of the role that this brand has played in their lives and the journey that it's been part of, and to try and ignite as many cues as possible to help generate this emotional response. And this can sometimes be done very simply. Recently, we saw Cremora revert back to their iconic "It's not inside, it's on top" campaign. Or bakers in the last couple of years also went on to recreate their legacy Baker's Man advert with all these kids making these giant biscuits, but retaining the script and very much retaining the historic Baker's Man can jingle. But there's also a myriad of other very creative ways in which heritage brands can adopt nostalgia marketing within their strategy that aren't reliant on recreating historic campaigns. And fundamentally, the job that we're trying to do with nostalgia marketing is to tap into highly emotive space and to create connections for our audience. And I think that a really beautiful example of this is what Nintendo did with its Switch campaign. And I'm gonna let you quickly watch the advert and then speak to you about it afterwards.
Get it out! No! Do it! Look what I found outside. Mark, look!
Who even are you?
You good?
Okay, Mom. All right, little man. You know, stop playing the victim. You need to calm down.
No. Don't tell me to calm down. You know what? Just enjoy your meal.
All right.
Yeah.
Same time next year.
Got a package, babe?
Hey, man. It's good to hear your voice.
So I think this is a really beautiful example of firstly storytelling, which is so important in evoking emotions and in evoking memories and nostalgic cues. And the product has beautifully been woven into the story of these two siblings' lives and taken on the role of connection. So, and it also has done a really good job of bringing past and present together. And sometimes with legacy brands, it is also difficult to make them relevant and current to new target audiences. But the job that's been done here is very much entrenching the past, but also taking the brand into a future space as well. Now, the thing with nostalgia and its application in advertising is that it isn't only limited to heritage brands. Younger brands can also tap into its value and the emotional resonance that it can deliver, even if they weren't around in the period in which they're referring to. In a South African context, I feel like it's almost impossible to talk about nostalgia advertising without thinking Alan Gray. And even though Alan Gray today has become quite entrenched as a heritage or a legacy brand, in the early 2000s, it was already using nostalgia marketing in many of its campaigns. And at the time, the brand was less than 30 years old. But what they did was they delivered this very poignant storytelling that spanned generations, which became synonymous with the brand's identity. And it took audiences on a journey of investing upfront and then reaping rewards downstream. And it was very successful in entrenching itself in the market in that way. While Alan Gray, to me, feels like the absolute epitome of nostalgia in advertising, it's also worthwhile noting that nostalgia isn't limited to wistful memories painted in sepia. It can also be quirky and fun and irreverent. And I think an amazing example that we've seen of that in recent years has to be Pineapple Insurance and the advertising that they've done. And they've done a very simple outdoor campaign that keeps evolving over time. But there's been a high level of risk-taking and very high levels of playful humor in it that's really starting to resonate with their Gen X and millennial audiences. And some notable examples, for me at least, are their light-hearted allusions to being the right insurance for the audience if they had an uncle in the furniture business, transporting audiences back to the zeitgeist that was Joshua Dawes advertising in the 1990s, or feeling betrayed when your favorite song becomes a TikTok trend, alluding to TikTok taking over legacy songs and making them go viral. And I mean, I was completely shocked when I heard my 11-year-old singing Sophie Ellis-Bextor's It's a Murder on the Dance Floor, which I hadn't heard since the early 2000s. But nostalgia's role also extends far beyond just advertising, and it can be very instrumental in actual products as well. And sometimes this is really just trends repeating themselves, like Adidas going and reintroducing Gazelle, which made a massive comeback. But there's also a big role to be played in reigniting the senses in order to activate loved memories. And a lot of research shows that smell and taste play a very big role in reigniting such memories. There's this prevailing theory that stems from a French essayist from the early 1900s who wrote a 7-volume series called In Search of Lost Time, which by some is considered to be the greatest literary work of the 20th century. And in the most famous passage from this voluminous text, the narrator Marcel goes and dips a Madeleine cake into a cup of tea, and the taste sensation that comes back to him brings back these vivid memories of his childhood. And this is involuntary. These memories just come back to him, and they're very deep and meaningful and powerful. And he tries to recall some other things and works hard to try to bring them back, but they weren't as effective as igniting the senses, particularly taste and smell. And this has led to the development of a whole theory being premised around this, and a lot of research downstream into this theory has explored why this connection between taste, smell, and memory is so powerful. And a lot of this comes down to neuroscience. So brain imaging and MRI scans have found that the olfactory bulb in the brain, which accounts for smell, is very closely linked to the hippocampus and the amygdala, which is also found in the brain, which play a very crucial role in encoding and retrieving memories. And that's why smell and taste can leave such a strong memory imprint in the minds of people. And in a recent study that I was part of into a legacy brand in South Africa that plays in the food territory, When we spoke to respondents about this brand, just mentioning the brand made them think of the smell and the taste associated with it. And it brought back feelings of home, of love, and of warmth. And this plays such an important role in brand building for this particular brand. Now, this local example also points us towards how nostalgia plays out quite differently within an African context. When we take a look at it globally, we often see that nostalgia can be cued by things like kumte or outlandish scrunchies or rollerblades. But within a South African environment, it takes on a much richer and more emotive space. South Africans tend to be looking for a much deeper connection when they remember their past, and they're more drawn to things that ignite feelings of culture, of family, and of community. And I think a really amazing example of a brand that really tapped into this space well is Tastic. And the Tastic and Laduma documentary, which followed a young designer's journey in building his business and really spoke to his sense of identity and the community that helped shape and establish him. And this advert actually went on to win Kantar's 2020 Best Liked Advert. So if I'm going to leave you with one parting thought on nostalgia and nostalgia in marketing, it really is this. Nostalgia acts as this activator in our brains. It's this trigger which takes us back to the happiest times in our past. And sometimes we're remembering those through rose-colored glasses, but nonetheless, it's transporting us into this place of love and warmth and connection. And for brands that are able to tap into this and to get it right in the space, the positive emotions that come flowing is absolutely immense. And they can come intrinsically linked to the brand and really work hard to garner a lot of brand equity.
Thank you, Talia. That was great. As you were mentioning it, as you were mentioning some of the brands and the adverts, I obviously started remembering things. I was like, wow, those are good memories for me. And then I kind of have to think about what my opinion is right now of those brands. And I gotta say, if they had to come up with something new linked to what I remember, I'd probably get into it. Maybe I'm just a sucker for nostalgia. But the immediate question that I had, and that I hope Terasai will expand on, is whether nostalgia is like a foremost tool that's being used by marketing professionals. We'll get into it. But Terasai, what did you think of the presentation and nostalgia marketing?
Thank you so much, Talia. That was incredible. I love how you touched on the psychological aspect of what would influence consumer purchasing, the side of the brain that would respond to such stimuli when people see ads, the smell, the feelings, and the nostalgia and the emotions that it creates around that. And I thank you so much for the examples and the brands that you referenced in line with that as well. They hit the nail on the head. In regards to your question, Govin, how I see or perceive nostalgia is my favorite word, it depends. It depends. It depends with the organization. It depends with the brand culture of the organization. And why I say it depends. For example, if it was a technology company, technology is all about making advancements, moving to the next best thing, continuously, growing within a certain field and being lead experts within a field. I don't see how there could be a correlation between technology advancements, for example, like a Facebook. I mean, it's a few years old, but obviously it's taken ground. But how would nostalgia for a company like that be relevant? But for the examples that Talia mentioned from like your food, let's say for Royco, Oros, those type of brands that she mentioned, you can see the correlation because it's relevant in the sense that it's very, there's the taste, the touch, the feel involved to it. So does this not depend within the industry that you're in that nostalgia would work? Would be my question.
So I do think it's the industry you're in. I also think it's what your target messaging is. It's what you're trying to evoke in your consumers. That Nintendo example, I mean, gaming is normally quite cutting edge as well, but they did tap into that legacy, and it obviously spoke to who they were trying to target. If you were trying to target 14-year-olds, chances are that would be relevant. they were trying to target an older generation of people and try to bring them back into the Switch, and probably with the knowledge that they have the spending power to go and buy a Nintendo for the child and make a decision about whether they're going to buy a Nintendo, an Xbox, or a PlayStation. So it very much depends on who your target market is, what your intended communication is, and the direction that you want to go in with that. But I also do agree with you that there's certain brands that it just makes more sense with, in terms of being legacy brands. I also have found that a lot of the legacy brands are having a hard time with it, though. It isn't always easy to transport yourself from the heritage into the new, and to make yourself new and modern and current, within today's environment. So there is a lot of work to be done in terms of how do you take these nostalgic cues, but by the same token, still be bringing new news and be relevant to your younger audiences as well.
You got to be clever, right? I mean,
exercise?
what I think is what I thought was cool about the Nintendo advert was not just the fact that they had the buildup of how the brothers were playing together. It was that when we were playing TV games, right, we'd sit in the living room and we'd play next to each other. And the great thing about that advert is not that it reminds you of how you used to play with your brother, is that it taps into the fact that now you can play with your brother online while talking to him, and it feels like he's still sitting next to you. And that's what makes it relevant. So the Nintendo Switch thing wasn't cool because of the console for me. It was the fact that, oh yeah, maybe I could play Mario Kart against my friend that I used to play with when he was sitting next to me as a kid. And that's what makes it clever. But some of it really fails. Like, we're inundated with videos that say, remember these top 30 adverts from your childhood, right? So I watch those all the time. So I do remember them. And then when a brand remakes them, it's either I'm going to say, oh, wow, they've remade my favorite advert, or I remember that. Or I'll be like, oh, that's really cool. They've reinvented my favorite advert, and now I have a great deal of respect and loyalty. So it can fail, right?
It can absolutely fail. And it, as I was saying, it can also it has the risk of making brands seem dated as well. And I think that's where you've got to be very careful with how nostalgia is implemented. Interestingly for me, and speaking back to the examples that we have looked at, I think Alan Gray's been unbelievable in the way that they've done it. They've very much kept a very similar premise to most of their advertising, and something about it feels timeless. Like for me, Alan Gray now feels like Chanel. It's classy and beautiful and emotional, and well, maybe Chanel isn't emotional, but it's really been able to cement the brand through the very consistent execution that it's done. But it's also, for me, about storytelling. And I think the brands that get it right are able to tell stories. And that is where Alan Gray's gotten it so right in terms of the execution of those stories. It's where Nintendo got it so right in that it told a very evocative story of the journey. So it wasn't just about saying the brand was around before and it's around now. It's about tugging at our heartstrings and making us feel something deep. And in the Nintendo, it was actually about the relationship with the brother, more than just the nostalgia. But the nostalgia was part of that journey for those two siblings in that.
Terasai, have we seen brands make any comebacks because of nostalgia marketing?
I think a good example would probably be Oros, or in Zimbabwe, it would be Chibuku. They have managed to come up with these stories that they tell consistently, and from generation to generation, it has almost managed to live through. Even Nickelodeon with with SpongeBob, and then they'll tie it in with a SpongeBob festival, and then they'll tie it in with the SpongeBob series, and then they'll do a distribution in market to kids' schools where kids are coloring SpongeBob books. So you can see this character is living across from one season to the next, or from one generation to the next, and remaining relevant within those generations. And I mean, they tie it into coloring, they tie it into puzzles, they tie it into reading cards that kids can use, but the character is continuously being transported. I watch SpongeBob, my grandparents probably watch SpongeBob, and the character remains. So within as well with the traditional beers as well, because there's that, you know, the beer gets refined and the quality gets refined with time. But they have also been, I think those are like really good examples where it's moved on across the generations, and those have been successful and they remain relevant within the market. It's just obviously there is now in the market a lot of saturation of products. In terms of on the shelf, there's multiple products. So customer loyalty is becoming shaky because they can almost get the same product, maybe cheaper or at the same price or at the same value, but maybe there has been some product design that has been added. So now instead of it being originally an unhealthy beverage, now suddenly it's a light, 0%, it's vegan, it's this. And so all those attributes and the saturation of the markets makes it also difficult for nostalgia to play in, because people are looking at their pockets and saying, which product should I buy?
Yeah, I guess if you have a history of being unhealthy, to flip now, well, I don't know. Talia, could you use nostalgia marketing to rebrand, so to speak?
Product design, product development.
So I'll be honest, in terms of FMCG products, at the top of my hand, I can't think of any that have leveraged nostalgia marketing in rebranding effectively. I'm sure there are examples, I can't think of them. For me, something that does come to mind though, with massively rebranding is Barbie. I mean, I'm astounded that Barbie came back. I mean, she was everything that we didn't want for our daughters. Why were we aspiring to an anorexic blonde? We weren't. But I think they came back with a bit, and part of the way that they did it was by really listening to consumer sentiment and consumer sentiment around Barbie, and moving into, initially they moved into territories of Barbie can be anything. She can be a fighter pilot, she can be a teacher, she can be so progressing away from the 1950s housewife that was just purely about appearance. Then they started launching Barbies that were more curvaceous, that were different races. She didn't have to be a Caucasian blonde anymore. And I think for me, the movie really was the absolute ultimate progression away, because they went into a very purposeful space, and love it or hate it, the premise of it was very much female empowerment, which is actually everything that Barbie wasn't historically. And I really do think that it's an amazing execution of it. And I think that where it also held so true is that the backstory behind it even spoke to female empowerment, because the female actress was one of the producers, and it wasn't a man's world, and she was just cast in it in the way that you would have been before the Me Too movement. She was an integral part of the Barbie movie and the journey and the story behind it, and she was very powerful and influential. And I think that is what this generation of consumers demand. They want purpose, they want authenticity and integrity, and they want to see that throughout the journey. They don't just want to see it in their advertising. They want to see it laced throughout everything that we're offering up to them.
That's a very, very valid point. I mean, if you look at within the South African context, there are certain brands and products that might be associated with the apartheid era, and how that product was maybe traditionally not allowed to be sold to marginalized people. So now if you bring a nostalgic brand advert about that product, who exactly would you be talking to? And as a company or as a product, have you managed to move from that era and progressed from your company culture, your social following, your communication, as a company, your employment structure, your benefit structure, has all of that transformed to show that now this product is able to be sold to everyone who can afford it? Or are you still dialing down between those? So it's very important to show continuous consumer culture and growth throughout the product life cycle as well.
Yeah, perhaps representation transformation is rebranding in South Africa, and it has less to do with the product than it does with the company. And that could be beneficial to a company's identity. But what we're talking about now is using nostalgia marketing. Talia, when is the right time to consider nostalgia marketing for the brand you represent?
So I don't know if there's necessarily a right and a wrong time for it. I think it's a strategy that you can employ when it makes sense for your brand. I keep coming back to the examples that I've shared with you, but I've just spent a lot of time thinking about them. And for something like Alan Gray, it makes so much sense to employ nostalgia marketing, because they're speaking about how investing upfront reaps these rewards downstream. So taking consumers along this nostalgic journey really makes sense in context of their message. In the pineapple adverts that I spoke about, if you take a look at what they are, they're funny and they're irreverent and cute and quirky, and they're making people remember. But then downstream, after they had gone through a whole lot of those fun, reminiscent sort of adverts, they went with the campaign. They changed all their billboards to "You don't know what you've got until it's gone." It made sense in context of the message. So I think that's what it comes down to. If you're just employing it as a tactic, it's never going to be very effective, because tactics are, they can garner some short-term attention. But ultimately, if you're using it as part of your strategy and it's very linked to the message that you're trying to deliver to audiences, I think that's where it has power.
If you're sitting in a marketing team meeting, Tarasai, and you pitch a nostalgia campaign, right? Right. From the consumer's perspective, sometimes it looks like when these ads come out that these teams couldn't think of anything new, so they rehashed the old. How do you pitch a nostalgia campaign without looking like you couldn't think of anything new? And how do you drive home that message that this is actually cutting edge? It's not dipping back.
I think it has to do with partnerships. So sometimes you can partner with another brand. I think you've seen it within the clothing sector, especially. You will relaunch Levi retro jeans. So retro jeans in the sense that you're going back to maybe the 70s era, but then you're partnering it with a Levi brand that is relevant and current within today's age. So you can form a partnership with a current or relevant brand or a youthful brand and see if you can form synergies between the two brands so that when it's launched into the market, it works. Then that way you're targeting multiple audiences. You're targeting the older people who remember what a bell-bottom jean is, and you're also targeting the younger ones who are more impressionable and see it trending on TikTok. And now it's like, oh, there's these filters around these bell-bottoms. You can add certain things around the shoes or the chains, and then all of a sudden you've got this retro look. So if you can find a good synergy and a good partnership with another brand, number one, that could be a winning or a selling point. Another thing would be to really tie down your data in the sense that who exactly are you speaking to? What are their demographics? Where are they living? Which area are they based at? And if you can really narrow that down and say, okay, I'm literally only talking to people born from 40 to 50 or people who are 30 to 35, then also you can then narrow your messaging and speak specifically to them. Because if you just say, okay, we're just going back to the past, but whose past? Is it Govan's past? Is it Talia's past? Is it Tarasai's past? Whose past? So you really need to narrow down the consumer that you're speaking to and then launch it. And also the platforms. Is it TV, radio, social media? Which platform are you going to use along with your visuals? I'm sure you've seen those Gucci ads when they went back into time and everyone looked like the Marilyn Monroe era. So it depends. Then you can use that type of visual film shooting, direction style, creative style, and that gives it a bit of a refresh as well.
Talia, what do you think?
I completely agree with Teresa, and I think that the world around us right now demands personalization to a large extent in most of the marketing that we do. And understanding who your consumer is and who you're targeting and what's going to resonate with them is going to be so important. Because, you know, to Teresa's point, if you cannot be targeting a millennial with any nostalgic cues that are relevant to a baby boomer. You need to know you need to know who it is that you're speaking to, and then find cues that are going to be relevant to them, and to make sure that they actually are sparking emotion and that they're sparking the right emotion in them as well.
Interesting that you speak about cues and that smell and taste are some of the strongest nostalgic cues, right? Must be incredibly difficult to make use of them in marketing. In my line of work, how I react to what's happening in the news is incredibly important because I'm somehow representative of the person sitting at home. How do you make use of smell and taste, Talia?
So there's an unbelievable example of McDonald's. I'm not sure which country it was in. It could have been the Netherlands or something. It's obviously a very clean country because there weren't too many fumes on the road. But what it actually did was when when people walk past their outdoor advertising, it actually gave off a whiff of McDonald's fries. And how delicious is the smell of those McDonald's fries? Their sales went through the roof. That's reminding, and that's not necessarily old nostalgia, but it's memory and smell, and just the smell of that, it makes you want it. So I think that there's a role in that. I think there's a big role in appetite appeal as well, and a lot of the manufacturers are very good in working that appetite appeal into their communication as well. But I think there are really creative ways out there to do it, and those are the territories that really need to be explored.
And I think you can also tie it in with cultural events. Events on the calendar, if you're having Heritage Day, and you can tie in a nostalgia marketing theme around Heritage Day because people are already out with their families and enjoying some heritage event, and you bring in your brand within that and make people experience maybe before there was a specific product that you had relaunched or added to the market, and then people can get to taste it and try it, and it was made the way it was made back in the day. Already that can increase brand awareness around your brand, and it can also increase the number of people that taste and experience your product right then and then. So it doesn't always have to be a TV or a digital commercial. It can also be an activation on the ground.
Okay. I can think of a number of brands that did that with the braai just before Heritage Day and in December, mind you. Not mad at it. Love braaiing. But Talia, how saturated is the nostalgic marketing environment, or how many people are actually making use of nostalgia in marketing right now? Is it a prevalent brand strategy?
So nostalgia is becoming quite prevalent as a topic, and social media has had a very big role in bringing it back. Crazy things are trending that are from eons ago. All of a sudden, ABBA is back again. I mean, ABBA is from so long ago. So social media really has brought this insurgence of nostalgia becoming relevant. And as it's become relevant, so too more and more brands have jumped on board and are taking advantage of it. So is it being used quite a lot at the moment? Yes. Is it saturated? Possibly, possibly will be getting to saturation point very, very soon. But I think it's about the way in which it's used. And I think that that clever and creative executions, there will absolutely always be a place for it. I agree with you in terms of creating historic campaigns. Possibly we're getting to a point where we need to be doing funkier things, bringing more new news. But I think there are ways to leverage it in a more current way. And especially when the brands have something new to say, you can very much say, I've been here for so long, and bring all those emotions and that trust and bring that connection, but then transport it to the new era of, we've walked this journey, this is where we're going together. And I think that brands like Coke have done that very well. Brands like Nike have done that very well. You know, they've shown you how they've walked the journey, but they're going into new and current and relevant territories. And a lot of this also sits in innovation in terms of actual product and as well as communication.
What happens when it reaches saturation point? Do brands back off? What happens, Talia, what happens when there are too many nostalgic adverts on television or in the magazines or outdoor? Is that going to spook people?
Well, I think with anything, you don't want to be, just same as everybody else. You do need to find new and relevant and interesting territories. So yes, when too many brands are all doing the same thing, absolutely, you've got to find a new avenue of it. I'll be honest, what I'm seeing a lot of at the moment is what I referred to earlier about brands talking about history in sepia, where it's very much this whimsical, sort of slow, very much filtered story with very old sort of music and that's trying to evoke possibly like a sadder form of nostalgia, or a more wistful, not sad, a wistful form of nostalgia. I think what the part that isn't as saturated is the quirky, irreverent side of it, and that piece of it still probably has some room to go. And off the top of my head, I think a brand that could probably tap into that amazingly is Nando's, which is always on point with their communication and are very much part of South African culture as well.
Terasai, are we seeing, well, I mean, we usually ask this question at the end, but I think it's appropriate now. Where does making use of nostalgia marketing in a brand strategy, in a marketing strategy for a brand rank at the moment?
Oh, that's a difficult one. That's a very difficult. Talia, do you have input on that one?
Well, in your opinion, to allow you to be subjective, where would you rank it,
It depends on the brand. Obviously, your traditional brands that have been there for longer, this means a lot to them because they value and appreciate the customers that have walked with them throughout the cycle of their growth, and they want to take it over to the next generation and to their children and children's homes, etc. So for them, it would rank extremely high. And then you have the newer products, the newer ones that are on market, that are launching quickly. They're happy with their 6-second ads, whether they talk about nothing or not, as long as their product is seen, they're happy about those ones. So it really depends with the life cycle of the product. If your product is in the maturity phase, or your brand is in the maturity phase, then it's a very important tool to use. But if your brand is still in the early stages of development, then it would not be key priority. Right now, your main priority would be to just get awareness, make sure that at least people know of you.
I guess it does really depend. But what could sway doubtful marketers into considering the use of nostalgia marketing and its effects is knowing a bit more about the results. So Talia, when nostalgia marketing works, right? What happens? What are the outcomes?
So I think in order to understand how nostalgia works, you actually need to take a step back, possibly from nostalgia, and see where it sort of fits in from a consumer perspective. And what it has become very topical in marketing at the moment and in advertising is triggering emotional cues. We find in consumers and audiences at the moment really wanting to have a deep connection with something, especially as things become more and more expensive. We've spoken to it a little bit earlier. You know, inflation has been absolutely through the roof. And it's getting a lot harder to get people to part with their money. And what brands need to do is really build a solid relationship together with their consumers. And it's been proven that it's very effective, that when you can create an emotional bond between yourself and your product, that consumers are going to be more likely to buy it. And nostalgia plays a big role there, because nostalgia really taps into emotional cues. So is it right for all brands? Is it right for all strategies? Absolutely not. Building an emotional relationship with brands, that's quite universal, and that is quite relevant to everyone. And that has a proven impact on increasing brand equity, which decreases price elasticity of a product. And nostalgia marketing is a tool in the arsenal of things that you can do in order to build an emotional connection with a brand.
I'm not sure if you've seen the latest Apple ad with the tablet. And what they do is they crush every form of beautiful piece from the past. You've got this table with pianos, with the squeegees, with the Roblox, all of them on this one table, and all these very important pieces from childhood, and they literally crush it all down. And then out comes this beautiful tablet, and they say basically that, you know, it's almost like saying out with the old, in with the new, or all the things that you could have before. You needed a piano, you needed this, you needed that. Listen, it's in just one device and you can get access to all of that. And social media went ablaze. People were so angry. How dare you do that to my childhood? How dare you crush that piece of, you know, something that mattered to me, and say it doesn't matter anymore? And they were extremely angry. But the whole campaign for them was, this is not our generation. Those things are not relevant for the audience that we now have. Our audience has never known that piece of gadget. They've never known a cassette in their lives. All they know is their devices. So that's who we are talking to. So it's also important for brands, as they are progressing, to also be sensitive to the fact that there are certain nostalgic moments and certain nostalgic things that mean something to people, and you don't tear it down in the process of uplifting. And to strike that balance is always going to be very, very critical for marketers.
So I need to add to that, because in a lot of the work that I've been part of recently, that is something that's also so prevalent within a South African context. South Africans feel very, very strongly about their roots. Their roots are so important to them, their sense of culture, their sense of family, and you don't ever want to do anything to in any way be betraying that, because you would not do anything insensitive to your heritage, to your culture. So for a brand to come in and do it would probably be seen as very controversial and in very bad taste. So I think if globally that was badly received, I think within a South African space, it would probably be, if a brand had to go and try to do that to South African cues, I think it would probably go down even worse.
Yeah, it actually just made me angry. And I hadn't seen the ad. Just the way that you described that. But I suppose that it speaks to the risk behind nostalgic marketing, or using nostalgia in marketing. What Pineapple does well, and Nando's as well at sometimes, is talk about a time. So use a period of time in South Africa and then link that to their brand. Other brands don't necessarily have anything to do with the time, but they talk about their own history and then build campaigns based on themselves. So is it risky to incorporate, or say capture, a person's childhood and tie it to your own brand, even if they may not have considered your brand to be part of their childhood?
So I think it comes down to execution. I think on the one hand, you are at risk of cultural appropriation if you go and you take on somebody's past and that you weren't part of. and then try and place yourself in it when you really were irrelevant. But I think it comes down to how you do that, and I think it comes down to authenticity. And I keep coming back to pineapple because I'm quite obsessed with that example. But they're not trying to say they were part of your past. They're just referencing your past, and they're including it in their messaging today. I think that if you had to go and take a brand and make it quite whimsical and try and engineer it into somebody's past, it may come out as quite disingenuous. And there, I think you probably would run some risk.
What do you think, Teresa?
I think it depends with which points of connection you are tying it to. Let's say, for example, if someone has had a child, the experience will probably, yes, maybe some gave birth in a difficult position, some might have had a C-section, some might have had a natural birth, but the joy that came from that is received the same. The emotion behind delivering a child is received the same. The congratulation ceremony is received the same. When someone graduates and you tie it into a graduation, we know it's a happy festival for anyone. It doesn't matter your demographic, doesn't matter your color, your race, it's still a happy, treasurable moment. So it depends with the extent to which you generalize, so to speak, what type of event it is within the past.
Teresa, is it an easy decision to take on a nostalgia campaign at the moment, or to launch one? You think it's low risk, easy?
Well, it's being done currently. I mean, every single ANC campaign ties into the past and ties into Mandela and all of that. So it's already happening. It's not like it's not happening. Whether you call it a brand or not, it is still it's still being used for that reason. So it just depends. It might not be a retail ad, but it's definitely a nostalgic ad playing into the polls and the elections and all of that. So it's being done.
So, Talia, would you say we're in the golden age of using nostalgia in marketing in South Africa right now?
So yes, at the moment, I think we're seeing more of it now than I've seen in many, many years. Sometimes it's done well, sometimes it's not. But I do think that at the moment we are seeing quite a lot of it. And it's also the more, in my mind, the more of it we're seeing, the more I think marketers are being challenged to find more interesting and creative ways to use it, so that they move into different territories.
You know who's really good at nostalgia marketing? Not necessarily marketing a brand, but using the good things about our past to make himself more likable, is AKA. He famously employed the golden thread theory. So he would constantly recite lyrics from very old songs that we all loved, or use their melodies. And there's a big famous story about when he got offered the deal to do the vodka. They asked him which flavor he wants to represent. And then he said, it has to be watermelon, because we all remember the watermelon Chappie's bubblegum. And that was the most famous bubblegum in South Africa. Do you think that people could do that? Or companies could do that, just associate themselves with the good things?
Well, you just use it as a brilliant example. I think I had a Chappie's the other day, actually.
Watermelon.
Yes. So that's great.
But could you use, I mean, marketers represent brands for sure, but they're also trying to build company identities. Could you tie your company identity to the past by leveraging on things like that? Or you think that's also too risky, Talia?
I don't think it's risky. And I think that where you need to be careful is tying yourself to the past. I think you want to be linking yourself to the past, but you also need to be propelling yourself into the future. And I think the example that you just gave was taking something that was legacy, but also doing something relevant and current, and using a current local execution of it. And that's what progresses you and propels you ahead rather than holds you back. So I think that's quite important in nostalgia marketing at the moment, is how do you take that watermelon, but then link it to AKA so that you're holding on to your heritage, but you're also modernizing at the same time.
I guess it doesn't apply if you want to be something completely brand new or futuristic. The Nintendo Switch advert shows us up in that respect, but do you shy away from nostalgia completely when you want to be known as the new thing? I suppose you don't because of pineapple as well, but it does seem like if you want to be a spaceship, you can't talk about cars.
For me, it really depends, because history can also say, I've always been pioneering. Do you know what I'm saying? If a brand like Nike had to say, I've always been on the forefront of innovation, and now I'm bringing you the biggest innovation. If Apple had to say, I'm the one who transitioned you from a cassette to an iPod, I'm the one who brought on a smartphone. If you speak to the legacy that you've had, but in terms of how you've always delivered something new and you're bringing something new, you also have to have some new news attached to it. You can't just have, an iPhone 16 that's exactly the same as the iPhone 15. But I think you can tap into the things you've done that have really been progressive, and speak to them in a nostalgic way and say that you have always been a pioneer. So I'd imagine even tech companies can do that if they do it well. But it all comes down to execution.
We're almost out of time, but just as a final question, have we got any data on how nostalgia marketing campaigns have made companies perform very well or perform very badly?
Coca-Cola, when Coca-Cola did the Share Your Coke, and people's names were being written on the bottle, and everyone's name, and you could find your cousin's name or your uncle's name on the bottles, and then you'd buy it and you'd share it on social media. Their sales skyrocketed because they said they were celebrating, I think they were celebrating their 100 years, and they did the Share Your Coke. And because of that, it was like a nostalgic execution, but tied in with a cultural event, tied in with personalization because people were putting their names on the bottle, and tied in with the sharing and resharing and the engagement on social media, which is relevant and current. And because of that, their sales actually skyrocketed that year. So if that helps you with the data question.
Okay, so we have reached the end of this episode. We usually try to finish with a recap. And Teresa, I'll begin with you. What do you think marketers should keep top of mind when they're thinking about nostalgia marketing? And what were your takeaways from this episode?
So key touch points are that there should always be an emotional connection with you and your consumer, and you must understand where they are within their cycle journey, which means the collecting of data to know their demographics, to know their history, and also personalization in terms of understanding. Is this post-apartheid, pre-apartheid, millennial, Gen Z? Who are you exactly talking to? And then tie your messaging with emotional connections that will resonate. Happy moments that make people feel good to some extent, as mentioned, and Alan Gray does do that quite well with either the birth and then the son or the daughter traveling through the presence of time, celebrating a graduation, a marriage, a wedding, etc. They do kind of tie all of that.
And what do you think marketers should be thinking about, Talia? And what should they take away from this conversation? I have a feeling a lot of them will give it a try after hearing this.
I think that emotion in marketing is becoming absolutely cornerstone to brands and to brand building. I think gone are the days when you can just slap on a couple of functional benefits and expect consumers to buy you long term because another brand is going to come up with the same functional benefits. I think what marketers want to do is really create deep emotional connections with their target audiences in order to make them consumers of the brand. And nostalgia marketing can play such a pivotal role in building those emotions because it's quite an easy way of tapping into those emotions by taking people back into a space that they're reminiscing about, that they long for. We quite easily move into that emotional territory. So I do think it's a very relevant tool. I think it needs to be used appropriately, though. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It makes sense for certain brands. It makes sense for certain messages. I think that if applied incorrectly, it can be quite irrelevant to consumers and target audiences. But used well, used for the right brands, and with used with a deep understanding of consumers and the emotional reaction that it's going to generate, it can be a very evocative way of bringing about emotion in consumers and building brand equity.
Thank you. I have to say this discussion was very enlightening for me, and I'm sure it's been for those who are watching as well. My takeaways are that we're currently in the golden age of nostalgia marketing, and that it will probably reach a saturation point. So, to quote the famous Yaku paper with the ball at the edge of the scrum, use it or lose it. I think that's about as much as I can contribute to that. But I want to thank you very much for your time. Talia Grusin, seasoned marketing professional. I was enthralled by the discussion, and I will be watching every nostalgic ad with a critical eye from now on. And thank you so much to Teresa Moffat for helping us navigate this discussion with your insights. It's been a pleasure as always, and thank you to everyone watching. Hope that you've enjoyed the conversation and that we've been able to broaden your minds and given you a bit more courage to employ these strategies when you're developing your campaigns. We hope to give you insight into the world of marketing and the latest trends, but also to develop the conversation and encourage debate. So keep the conversation going on social media, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, Facebook. And if you're feeling nostalgic on Mixit, if you still have that app. But talk about it. Let's hear what you have to say. And for myself, Govan Whittles, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for watching the IMM Institute's Friday Flash Talk, and we'll see you next time.